and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph, Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis the 13th. Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head. My top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas. Pension for the workers, nigga, please. Embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement. I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut. Foreclose a big close out the tenement. I twist words like a speech impediment. I hope you got good credit, bitch. If not, better get a new job with benefits. While I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with. New money buys brand new carrots. My old money bunch of great grandparents. You got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya. I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. tonight on Voice of Rebellion Radio here at the one and only UCY.tv and wherever else you are listening to this show from, whatever other platform. I thank you for tuning in. And tonight is April 16th, 2017. It's a little past 9 Eastern time here on the East Coast. And been a historic week for sure. And been multiple crazy things that have happened this week. I guess the first that could be mentioned is the fact that the first time ever in combat history, the massive ordnance air bomb, I think the proper acronym for it, was used in Afghanistan. The United States government purports that it was used on civilians, or not civilians, on ISIS terrorists, and they apparently no civilians were injured in the attack. Though apparently there was reports or whatnot saying that this actually were tunnels belonging that the CIA built a long time ago that they used this bomb on. Now, this is not just any bomb that was used. The Moab is a bomb with similar strengths to an atom bomb. And this is the first time we've seen a bomb, I guess, of this magnitude being used since the time of Nagasaki and since the time of World War II. So it's been 71 years since a bomb of this strength had been used. When you look at the specs of it, it's practically the same between a small atomic bomb versus a Moab, where they say that there's total devastation for 1 mile. I think houses and stuff can still be destroyed 1.7 miles out. This is no joke, this weapon that they used, and that they actually used it in combat. The United States is the only country to have used the atomic bomb twice, and now they become the first country to use, or I believe it was the first time we used the Moab. And they say that Russia has a similar weapon. It's actually 4 times stronger, called the father of all bombs. It's disputed whether this weapon actually exists, but it seems to have came at an interesting time with all this speculation of a potential World War III, and you have the potential now that the United States may get into a war with North Korea. There's this speculation of potential surgical strikes being done against North Korea, and the tensions being pushed to the limit with Kim Il-sung's birthday having passed yesterday, with 105th birthday. He was born April 15th, 1912, the founder of North Korea. And a little background on the founder of North Korea is that he is the grandfather of the current leader and the father of the former leader, Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il. The first come in latter, obviously. Kim Il-sung led the country from 1948 to 1994, and pretty much established, you could say in a way, a de facto independence during the Cold War is that the North Korea did not exactly did not totally go for the Soviets ideologically and had their own ideology, which is the Jewish ideology, and based on Korean independence and socialism. And Kim Il Sung, during his time as leader, of course, he had strained relations with the West just as today. But his time that he was there, being there almost 5 decades, he's seen a lot. When he became president, Truman was the president of the United States, and when he died, Bill Clinton was the president. And throughout that time, North Korea, in some regards, probably did better than South Korea. When it comes to the fact that from the 1940s to the 1980s, South Korea was under a fascist dictatorship. At one point, ran by a man named Park Chung-hee, who was said to have massacred a whole village at one point, and had a very strict fascist regime that cracked down dissidents heavily. And still to this day, there's pretty strict rules in South Korea about suspected North Korean sympathizers. But back then, it was very brutal, and it didn't become a so-called democracy until 1987, after Chun Doo-hwan was the last dictator of South Korea. So most of the time that Kim Il-sung was there, South Korea was also what you could call a dictatorship, and the South Koreans lived in a pretty poor country, and in some ways, North Korea was ahead, I guess you could say, when it came to their development. Both countries have been practically leveled after the Korean War. North Korea kind of had a faster development and didn't have as long of a growing pains after the Korean War. That might have been in part from their strive for sovereignty rather than depending on other nations, like South Korea depended on the United States. And while North Korea may have had relationships with the Soviet Union or whatnot, I don't think it was not a total binding relationship with the Soviet Union like the Soviet Union had with other countries, but towed the ideological line, while North Korea practiced their own form of socialism, especially after 1972, I think, is when they wrote their new constitution. Another difference that you can also look at North Korea versus the Soviet Union is North Korea seems to, at least on the surface, have been more accepting of religion. I believe one of the vice presidents of North Korea was a Presbyterian, and which is very well-known fact. And also, I believe that Kim Il-sung, as a child, at least attended church. I don't think he was religious as an adult, but that's kind of a myth, is that the idea that North Korea is 100% hostile to all religion, while there's like a group called the Christian Friends of Korea, which I think is a group that goes over to North Korea or whatnot. It's a Christian group based out of the United States. There are churches in North Korea. There's a Christian population in North Korea, while they are a minority. While I think in South Korea there's a lot more. And for a whole different topic to talk about, difference between Christian and Catholic. But the Catholic population is pretty large in South Korea due to the fact that the GIs, I think, brought a lot of Catholicism over during the Korean War. But what happened in North Korea during the war was absolutely horrific. And anybody that's talking about that it'd be a good idea for the United States to go bomb North Korea obviously hasn't seen the horrors of what happened during the Korean War, and also what happened to our guys that went over there. I think it was like 53,000 American troops died during the Korean War in a matter of only like 3 years. And what it accomplished? It accomplished practically nothing. They called them the Korean War a victory. May be true in some regards, but at what cost was it? Is that all these American troops died. A dictatorship was established in the South, and the territorial changes were negligible. I mean, the DMZ was formed, but ultimately, in many ways, you could say, when it comes to territory, it seems that North Korea won. I mean, you look at what they do have compared to is that North Korea has a lot of mountainous areas, and I think that has somewhat of an advantage in a future conflict, while South Korea seems to be maybe a little bit more vulnerable. But the United States' role in Korea was completely pointless, and it pretty much devolved to the point. Then America got tied into a war with China as China came in over uh, to help North Korea, and whether it was to actually help Kim Il Sung, like I said, is that Kim Il Sung really didn't play too much when it came at least to ideology with the Chinese or Moscow. So was it more that they were trying to use Kim Il Sung as a future pawn, and that's why they came to help? Similar to why maybe the Chinese came to help the Vietnam, and then later after the war, China bombed Vietnam. So the Chinese have a tendency, at least in the past, definitely during the times of Mao Zedong, and of playing with their neighbors or whatever, and use stuff to their advantage. And North Korea didn't take a side when the Soviets and the Chinese split apart. There was besides the massively known split in the world between the West and the communists. There was inside the communists, there was the Soviet Union and China. They had split during around 1961, and the Chinese took a more hardline, like Stalinist approach, and the Soviet Union had moved away from that and went to a more, I guess you could say, modern, softer approach, if you could call it that, of communism. But of course, is that also one thing that the Soviet Union also did is that they forced their ideology down many countries, Africa and Latin America. Well, not really so much in Latin America, but there was examples also, one of the Soviet Union's ideological push being hurtful for true revolution. When you have, in Bolivia, where the Soviet Union sponsored the Communist Party of Bolivia, but the Communist Party of Bolivia would not help Che Guevara. And the Soviet Union did not like Che Guevara so much. And if Che Guevara had lived, imagine how much of Operation Condor could have been prevented. But because Che Guevara died, it is very, I think it's very much possible. That's part of the reason why Operation Condor happened to the extent that it did all across the continent. Because I'm sure that Che Guevara could have at least have been a part of liberating one, maybe a few countries across South America. And, the topic of tonight's show is about the coup. We just passed the 15th anniversary of the coup attempt against Hugo Chavez on April 11th, 2002. And it ended April 13th, 2002, I guess into the wee hours, April 14th, 2002, when Chavez came back into power. So now it's April 16th. So we just passed the anniversary just a few days ago. And Chavez, he had been in power for about 3 years at that point. He had already pissed off the United States, and he was moving towards nationalizing the oil, and there was the oil strike or whatever that was going on. It was very uncertain, the future of the oil trade. Is that the oil companies' future was uncertain, but Chavez had a plan, which was to use the oil to provide social services for people and whatnot. So the United States instituted the coup and whatnot, took him out on April 11th or April 12th. Pedro Carmona was brought in, but then he was ousted. When people found out that Chavez had not resigned but had been taken from the palace, people went to march and demanded that Chavez would return, and then he came back in the wee hours of April 14th, 2002, and became the president again. Now, 15 years later, we're still seeing the imperialist push against Venezuela. Was now President Trump taking a very hard stance against Venezuela, and now Russia's allies all around the world and Russia themselves, which has went along just as what I've said since the Trump election, is that I really didn't expect that Trump would have a long-standing relationship with Russia, and that eventually the relationship with Russia would fall apart. And it only took a few months for it to happen. And I'm not saying that like I'm happy because my prediction came true. I'm saying that I'm actually pretty disappointed because we couldn't, have some kind of rapprochement between Trump and Moscow. But instead, what we've had is a fall in relationships, and now Trump has taken this hard line against Russia. And it's funny to see a lot of his followers jump into the anti-Russia bandwagon now that Trump has taken a stance against Russia. But it's a very disastrous stance to take. And with Venezuela, how they come to it is that they're a small player in the whole game. They're one of Russia's allies. They're one of Russia's most important allies on this side of the world. And Venezuela, produces a lot of oil. They have a bigger oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. And Now with Nicolas Maduro, he's facing a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of push to get rid of him in this country from right-wing opposition, which, you know, probably it's been inflated, the numbers of how many people are actually against them. You know, they have these poll numbers where apparently 70% of the country's against them or whatnot. You know, of course, this could be inflated, as we've seen with poll numbers here in the United States. But Nicolas Maduro wants to continue the programs of Chavez, and he continues the Bolivian Revolution that's now been going on for 19 years. I guess you could say it was the election of Chavez in 1998. Maduro, however, is now reaching a pivotal point, because next year's the election, and now who will run in 2018 becomes the question. And also now it's starting to appear that Henrique Capriles is probably going to give one more run at the president, and if Henrique Capriles could be, you know, with definitely some weaseling and whatnot, could be pushed into the presidency with the help of the United States. But they still continue to try to do other methods, and they still continue with these organized protests and coup attempts, like we've had in February of 2015. There was another coup attempt that happened, not quite as known and not quite as loud as the one that happened on April 2002. But in April 2002, that coup attempt, April 12th, 2002, that coup attempt, you know, actually had the military involved, the clashes on the streets where the right-wing opposition opened fire on the Chavistas. And, you know, there was like countering marches. And, you know, it's what eventually happened was that members of the military removed Chavez and brought in Pedro Carmona. Carmona, an oil businessman, was going to be the next president of Venezuela, and they actually had like a swearing-in ceremony and everything. And he also dissolved the National Assembly, which is the parliament of Venezuela. He dissolved the National Assembly, and on that night of, or just that one day of the presidency, he was pretty much trying to erase all the progress of the Bolivian Revolution at a stroke of a pen. The National Assembly right now, you know, it's kind of ironic that today it's the thing that the right-wing opposition clings to. They have the majority in the National Assembly, and, you know, whether it was by totally legitimate means or whatnot, that's kind of a different story now. But the National Assembly they have a supermajority in the National Assembly thanks to 3 disputed seats that they got into. They sat into, which might have been by illegal means. The Supreme Court ruled that they shouldn't have been there, but they ended up in there anyways. And a supermajority, I think, is over 66%. So the PSUV is actually a smaller minority party when it comes to the National Assembly. But, you know, when it comes to governors, mayors, and the president, the PSUV is in charge, which the PSUV is the party that Chavez established, I think, in 2007, combining his party and other parties, like-minded parties, into a bigger like coalition, which is the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, United Socialist Party of Venezuela, that Chavez created. Now is not as powerful as it used to be. They had the majority of the National Assembly, and they were, you know, firmly seemed to be on to hold on to power. You know, it is kind of also exaggerated in the media how shaky Maduro's power is. Is that it's probably, I don't think he's under any true threat of him just losing his power. I don't think it's going to happen anyways by any, you know, kind of means inside the government or whatnot. If it's going to happen, it's going to be by a sudden coup or whatnot. And they've already faced this, so I feel like the military would be able to defend from that, you know, from inside the military, you know, unless it was a total betrayal like what happened with Allende back in 1973, where just like the entire military betrayed Allende, and that was backed by Henry Kissinger, David Rockefeller, your globalist backed a coup against Allende. And, you know, it's kind of ironic that the same people that rant about globalists or whatnot on, you know, Facebook and all right groups or whatever, often talk about, like throwing commies out of helicopters, throwing people out of helicopters, which, is a reference to the Pinochet. That was one of the tactics that he did to get rid of dissidents. But Pinochet was one of the biggest globalists that ever existed. And there's, there seems to be someone inside the alt-right that's kind of a affliction with Pinochet, which is ironic because Pinochet comes from the very people that they claim to hate. And I think that's part of the, it is kind of symbolic of the alt-right that, they're confused and they don't really know what they are, it seems like. But I think they, some of the people that are alt-right definitely have somewhat of a affliction with fascism. And they hear that Pinochet is a fascist, so they're like, oh, yeah, I'll jump on that. But people that don't equate fascism and globalism are pretty lost when it comes to politics in general, because fascism is, it comes from Benito Mussolini in Italy, and it was the combination of corporate and state power. One of the main things that globalism seeks to push around the world is that the corporate and state power merging. And when they see that the government stepping down their foot and, actually taking charge against the corporate world, like what we saw in Venezuela or whatnot, that goes against the globalist push. Chavez was going against their globalist mentality. What they want to see is countries like Colombia, privatization. Because even though the privatization may sound like it's the reduction of the government, when you start privatizing, education, you start privatizing state-ran enterprises such as oil and stuff like that, what you're actually doing usually is that it's really the government and their circle of buddies now running things. Now it's really the combination of corporate and state power, even though it looks like it's the releasing of government-ran institutions, the private interest. The connection still exists. While you have Venezuela, is that yes, the government and the corporate world, you could say, were merged, but now the government has bought out the corporate interest, bought out took out Exxon Mobil's interest out of Venezuela. But what essentially happened is that it's the people of the country now having control of the company. And it's not like, okay, for example, that if Chavez would have made a deal with Rex Tillerson to that, okay, we're going to allow you to stay, or since it's state ran, or we're gonna allow you to stay and continue to run this company as a private interest. That would be the example of fascism right there, or a fascist economic model. Of course, fascism is also, when it comes to social, how people live their lives, it's the government also getting more involved in, more aspects of people's lives, often bringing the military into everyday life, by policing and whatnot, and also making a more militaristic, warlike society is important towards making a more militaristic society is important towards fascist agenda. If it's when it comes to the internet nowadays, and, people like to rag on Venezuela or whatnot, and they say that there's this apocalyptic scenes and all this exaggeration. It's almost like the meme effect seems to be going into effect when it comes to political discussions about different countries. Is that people will see it one place, it starts going all over the place, and it's like, oh no, it's like food wars, bread lines. All of a sudden, these little, talking points become like a meme that so many people of a subscribed ideology spread. And what it ultimately does, it kind of does affect us, the critical thinking, don't you think? Like alt-right, for example, is that, maybe these people might have been, before they really got into the ideology, were, critical thinking people, that had varied views that might conflict with the mainstream line of whatever ideology. But when they get into that ideology, now they just have like these talking points, as they say. It's like Lel Cucks, it's like, you want food lines or for your country? Oh, you must be one of those liberal snowflakes that's against war. When it comes to being somewhat of similar to like my political views, that there's people would say that I don't really belong too much to a mainstream political view. It's like I don't belong with the alt-right. I don't belong with, I guess you could say your traditional Marxist Leninist on the internet. For one, I don't like Lenin, so I guess I couldn't really fit in there. Or your left libertarians, I don't really fit in with them, especially not the anarcho-communist, and don't really fit in with, the anarcho-capitalist crowd. So it's like you look at your four big quadrants on the spectrum, and just somewhere, kind of hard to pinpoint where exactly I am. I mean, I took the test one time, and it actually put me in the lower left quadrant, but it was like by the line of going into like the lower or upper left quadrant. It was like just about socially center, and then it was pretty left on the economic part. That's a while ago I took that test, and that's the thing that it was. I mean, I feel like it'd be kind of hard with a test to actually get your actual political stance, especially mine. It's like how many people are going to defend. Are gonna defend, I don't know, it's like Chavez and Le Pen in the same show, and that's another thing that's coming up is the French elections, and when it comes to how I see it, that Le Pen would be a massive defeat against globalism, and she seems to be actually when it comes to treating the workers and economics, she doesn't seem to be right wing at all, and her social views, while I have to disagree on some of them, they seem understandable. Is that why is Europe taking this road? Is bombing these countries and the refugees come to their countries? And these refugees probably, I have to say, is that they're coming from a much different culture to Europe. It doesn't seem like it's going to be very good. It's going to be very problematic. Rather than not bombing them and they stay in their countries. When they come to, these people oftentimes are probably psychologically disturbed from all the horrors that they had to see over there in the Middle East. They come to Europe, and then a few bad apples do a terror attack here, and then all of a sudden, there's then it just starts to stir the pot, and is that it agitates people. Right now there's so much division in Europe, and there's so much division in the United States, and it's these small events is causing it's contributing to that. And now, while some of them might have been false flags, I think that the 11, 13, 15 bombings were, or not bombings, but attacks were false flags. The 11, 13, 15 shooting this year, but there's probably been a few in Europe that have been false flags, but the ones that were real definitely created a lot of tension inside the countries. And what it also has contributed to is the martial law creeping in Europe, is that they can justify more militarization, more stuff to make people feel safe, but really it's the government cracking down, it's the government tightening the noose around the freedom in the country. And now France, all these countries are no longer the countries they used to be. Europe's different now. Europe is losing its liberty, and it's becoming a more militaristic continent that is more focused on safety rather than liberty and the other things that Europe used to stand for. But Le Pen in her presidential election, in one way you could compare it to Chavez is that it's like a total outsider candidate has creeped up towards the top of a poll, and there's a chance that she could win. And it's a 2-round election, so the first round's coming up like in a few days, and then we have the second round coming up. But I think Le Pen has a decent chance of winning, but that's of course if they don't interfere with the election, rig the election, as we have seen many times that they've been able to do. And I think that also there's also a chance that the one guy was at Mélenchon, which he's like in third place. He's like a far left candidate, and I don't think he's really like pro EU or anything like that. So that could also be a blow to the system if that he was somehow to win. But of course, Macron is like the establishment candidate. He's in second place, so there's a good chance that he could win as well. And the years of Sarkozy, the years of Hollande continue, and that France continues to play ball with the Americans and continues to be involved in regime change in Syria or in the Middle East. Which, right now what we're seeing in over in in Syria, it's been a disaster, and there's this push for war right now. So that's another thing that's continued. That we had the strikes just a few days ago, and now the tensions continue to stir up between the United States and Syria. Russia claims that the chemical weapons attack was a fakery that happened on lasted like 2 weeks ago. So Russia's taking a hard line stance against the United States provocation against Syria, and this accusation that they use chemical weapons against their own people, which there seems to be not very much evidence supporting this claim. There seems to be what we see, even like what appears in the footage or whatever, or pictures. You see these like one guy apparently that had been involved in the sarin gas attack was like sitting up on a and would refuse to lay down until he got back his headscarf or whatever. And other things that you see these people cleaning up sarin gas, and they're not even like hazmat suits or anything. When sarin gas is a very, very deadly chemical that if you even if you even gets on your skin or whatever, it can kill you. Sarin gas is definitely not something you just clean up like a spill of spilt milk or something like that. I don't know. They just they're hosing them down or something. And they're not even wearing any kind of protective clothing. So you have to question the legitimacy of that, and also the fact is that the ones that seem to be the evidence that they've used chemical weapons would be the rebels, and it would not surprise me that if the rebels had either A, made a fakery of that, or B, used chlorine gas or some other chemical weapons that they had stolen at some point or whatnot, or had created and used it against these people. It's how they translate back to Venezuela is that apparently I think it was Smolansky was the mayor. I think that was the mayor that said that the Venezuelan government had used chemical weapons against his people in Venezuela. Obviously, blatantly lie. Saying that they had used some red toxic gas like the one they use in Syria, which of course Tillerson was all on that about how ridiculous that was. And I think it was a mayor. I think it was Smolansky that said that, which is a right-wing opposition mayor there in Venezuela. And it seems like that's like a right-wing opposition, is that they always seem to try to look for somebody new to kind of be the new face of the movement, and they always falls apart pretty quickly. Leopoldo Lopez. You had Ledzema, who that fell apart pretty quickly. I think she was the former mayor of Caracas, and then you got like the Smolansky guy. And then eventually they just have to run Henrique Capriles, which Henrique Capriles is a failed candidate. He's failed twice, and I can see him failing a third time. And, Henrique Capriles is almost like, that's like running it's similar to, I think his popularity is pretty low. It'd be like running at this point like another Bush or something like that here in the United States and seeing his popularity here. The MUD, while they were able to win in the local elections that brought about the people to the parliament, I don't know if they could win a presidential election in 2018, which, that's somewhat reassuring to see that there seems to be the other party seems to be a joke. And I don't think that Maduro will run in 2018. And Maduro runs, then they're opening the doors for the MUD to win. And the United States could easily there would be really not much argument, even if there was the CNE disputed the results or whatever, the United States would say that that it was that was a legitimate victory for the MUD, even if it was fraud and whatnot happened. However, I think if Diosdado Cabellos ran, I don't think that Capriles would stand much of a chance. And there's also other people that could run. I think even that potentially Maduro's current vice president could run, Tariq El-Sami, who he seems to be a pretty vocal, strong leader. What Venezuela needs right now, they don't need someone that's collected, or they don't need someone that's seen as physically weaker. Chavez was it was hard to fill his shoes. Chavez was a strong, bombastic leader that carried that revolution for 14 years. Another thing is that that's coming up is the Iranian election with Ahmadinejad, or the Iranian election for president. And Ahmadinejad has announced that he's running this election, and it was kind of surprising because Ahmadinejad had previously said that he's not running this election. He said that he was gonna. He said that he wasn't running, and he was gonna back this guy, I think Bakai, his former aide or something. That now both of them were gonna run. Apparently, there was kind of a dispute between him and the supreme leader of Iran, because the supreme leader of Iran believed that Ahmadinejad was too polarizing, and that was part of the reason why I think that he faced some scrutiny during his own presidency. Back in 2012, I think he was brought to he was summoned to answer questions in front of the parliament, I think, and Ahmadinejad was seen as polarizing. I guess in his own country, he was somewhat polarizing because he went against the traditionalist Khamenei government, but at the same time, he was also polarizing overseas because of his hard stance against Israel, Saudi Arabia, and for his fiery speeches or whatnot. But it could be a possibility that Ahmadinejad comes back this spring, and we have over in Venezuela, maybe something like Diosdado Cabello come back next year, showing that Russia's allies are going to take a more harder stance against the United States imperialism, while rather than having these more collective Rouhani, Maduro that's not quite as seen as fervent as maybe Chavez. You have Cabellos and Ahmadinejad. And I think that also, instead of, and also in Cuba, apparently a hardliner is supposed to take place. Raul Castro, not saying that Raul Castro is not as dedicated as maybe Fidel was, but Miguel Diaz-Canel is expected to succeed Raul next year in Cuba. So now that the push against Cuba and Venezuela has become stronger now with the Trump administration, Trump, there was a when you look at it, compare what Trump had said during his presidency versus what has or during his campaign versus what has happened on his presidency. You look at it, and it's like two different people. We have is like harder or lesser stance on Russia, now a harder stance on Russia. During his campaign, China's fucking us over. Now China, we can work with China. Back then, it's that maybe we should stay out of the Syrian war. Now we should definitely get involved with the Syrian war. You look as you keep going, is that back then it's like we need outsider people like Bannon in order to help make America great again. Now it's like we're gonna have neocon people like Kushner. Another thing is that he went from and then went from make America great again. Now it's continue the military industrial machines bombing of all around the world. And and also when I said comparison between Bannon and Kushner, it's not like I support either one of them. Bannon's a piece of shit too, but I'm just saying is that he went from kind of appealing to some of his more alt-right followers to now to the neocons. And even some of his old followers are jumping off the bandwagon. I mean, now you have Paul Joseph Watson jumped off the bandwagon. Now, however, it seems that InfoWars still continues to be on the Trump bandwagon. It is weird to see Alex Jones defending a president, defending a government, like he has, or he's defending the president, defending the government. Alex Jones seems to almost be like a spokesman for Trump. I mean, so soon Alex Jones is going to be invited to Fox News, and he'll just be a host over there because that's what he's practically. He's just talking the neocon line almost at this point. I remember what Alex Jones used to say, is that all presidential candidates belong to the New World Order. There is no such thing as election in this country. Now it's like we elected a man that can make America great again. Alex Jones, while he continues to sell his water filters and male vitality pills, he's shilling for the establishment. And I used to watch Alex Jones. I used to like InfoWars back like 2013 or whatever. It was a while ago. It was still earlier in Obama's second term, and then later on, I started to pull away from Alex Jones. And when it comes to my personal preference, I'll take Jesse Ventura over Alex Jones. At least Jesse Ventura will criticize Trump, even though Trump is his old best friend, or what? Not his best friend, but one of his old friends. They were in the same party together. They were both in the Reform Party, and they were both in tinkering with politics around the same time. Jesse Ventura, at least seems to, he's not too biased to one political side. But I don't. Alex Jones, I can't support him. I can't even. I don't even like sharing his articles from his page. And a lot of what InfoWars has turned into is pretty much showing the liberal snowflakes and how Trump is so much better than all of them. But Trump is continuing the same policies of Obama. It's just a continuation of the military-industrial complex. And if people say that Donald Trump is going to get assassinated or whatever, he's one of them. They're not going to touch Donald Trump. Donald Trump is just another New World Order insider. And, like I said, is that you couldn't get big in real estate in New York without knowing some people on the inside or whatnot, without knowing without having some Zionist connections and whatnot. And Donald Trump fits that category, is that, he was a billionaire. There's not even that many of those people on the planet. And Donald Trump was one of those few. So what? Donald Trump was the one that was different. I saw there was one story apparently of a billionaire that gave away like all but $2 million of his wealth. So maybe that one billionaire might not belong to the club. But Donald Trump, he's not the rare exception. He's not that one guy. I can't remember his name, that gave away almost all his money to charity or whatnot. And if you have that much money, if you accumulate that much money, I don't think you can be a good person, because at that point you've exploited so many people, and as well that you're hoarding so much money that you're literally, what's that money? Many people could eat, many people could have a house, But if you give that to charity, that's a different story, I believe. Potentially, I don't know, because at the same time, I think is that even to get to that point, to get into the billions we're talking about, not just become a millionaire, become rich, become ultra rich, you have to wonder, how do you get to that point? But definitely to hold on to that wealth, you can't. I don't know if you could be a good person and have a net worth in the billions. And Donald Trump, has, and he's not even known to get charity or anything like that. Not that I know of. And Donald Trump says that, he claims to have like $10 billion, even though that he probably only has like 3.8 or whatnot. Trump's been a billionaire for a while too. He's been one of the richest. Now he's one of the richest people in America. But he's been at that level for years now. I think he was almost at $1 billion back like the 1980s. He reached like 700 million. There was like that whole special or whatever that they played on the History Channel about Trump. They got all. I saw, and right around the time of Trump Airlines and whatnot, he was like at 700 million. He's played around with the system, and that's another thing, is that he pretty much brags about how he used the system to his advantage, just like all these other really rich people. He claimed bankruptcy 4 times. 4 times. He on top of all that, it's that he had the massive tax write-offs. Very another similar method for these ultra rich to keep their wealth, is that he wrote off a gigantic loss one year, and now he hasn't paid any taxes since. But what's all the hysteria, or what's all about Trump? All the hysteria against Trump though has been seems to be almost equally ridiculous, with all the talk about the Russia connections, and people are still thinking that that there's some kind of shady connections between Trump and Russia. And I was saying after the Syrian strikes, is like, wow, this guy really looks like a Russian puppet, huh? He strikes one of Russia's most important allies, and there's still people that will say, oh yeah, he's an agent of the Kremlin or whatnot. He's Putin's best friend. And they play these articles or whatever. Apparently, back in 2013, there might have been some kind of a connection between Putin and Trump, and that they say they might have met personally or whatever. Again, Trump, his connections they're more important than the connections that he has to people like Henry Kissinger or whatnot. And it's kind of weird that after he met with Henry Kissinger, then he picked Mike Pence to be his vice president, which I don't think is coincidental that happened. I think that I think Mike Pence is kind of like the Dick Cheney figure in this presidency, is that you have this kind of wild, buffoonish character, and then you have under him an establishment collected character, like Bush. You had Cheney under him. You have Trump. You have Pence under him, which Pence is just another establishment politician. That should have put a lot of red flags when Trump picked Pence to be his vice president rather than someone that was not so establishment. And then people will point to it's like, well, he picked Rex Tillerson, which is kind of outside the establishment. But then almost as soon as before he's even becomes the Secretary of State, he's already talking about regime change in Venezuela. I know that he received the Order of Friendship medal from Russia or whatever in 2013, but that's actually not too hard to get that. I think I point out that there's been other people that have got that, and they're not really, you don't have to really be the best friend of Russia to get that. Rex Tillerson, who was in the oil industry for 40 years, I believe is just another establishment person, another billionaire that also, disgruntled about what happened to him in Venezuela 10 years ago. And he continues to hold a grudge against Venezuela because he didn't get the money that he wanted when they gave him his buyout for his shares of ExxonMobil in Venezuela. ExxonMobil, which is one of the biggest oil companies in the world, it's like, what's next? Are we going to say that the Waltons walking into the government would be an anti-establishment move, or even not even that ridiculous? But think about, or something like, the CEO of, even like saying something like that the CEO of Kraft or something walking into the government, it would be anti-establishment or something. It's like Kraft actually. They own the New England Patriots. Tom Brady is a fan of Donald Trump, so heck, that might not even be that outside the possibilities. But Kraft also being like one of the 6 largest food companies, one of like the 6 companies that control all the food in America. Similar to like ExxonMobil, how much of the oil industry that they control. When you talk about these mega corporations, is there any CEO that's going to be anti-establishment? Of course not. To me, it looks pretty obvious, and it's not like they came out of maybe some small startup business or whatever, and became big in the last 10 years. No, they came from these companies that have been rich for 100 years. The Trump cabinet is the swamp. This whole talk about drain the swamp never happened, and apparently I looked at this Facebook group called Drain the Swamp. There's still people defending Trump. Rather than the big question that should be right now is why is the swamp not being drained? The swamp still is here. And we are, we're being lied to. We're being told that these massive changes are happening. But just like in the Obama presidency, is that we hoped and changed, and we got nothing. And Obama, even at the beginning, think about back to 2009 Obama, is that a lot of people were waiting for his big moves, that the big things that were going to completely change America. They're waiting for Obama to have made the greatest presidency in American history, similar to what people are expecting with Donald Trump still right now. and we were utterly disappointed. And in 2010, you have this Obamacare's passed, and which helps out the pharmaceutical companies, helps out the big the healthcare industry, and also we see a continuation of the wars in the Middle East, and Guantanamo stayed open the entire time during Obama's presidency. One thing that he said he would close during his presidency never happened. And now was Donald Trump that's going to stay open. That, like he said, is that we're going to keep Guantanamo open. We're going to fill it with some bad dudes. That's what he said about a year ago. It's kind of weird to think that, like some of these key points in the Trump campaign are now, it's like, oh, wow, that was a year ago. In fact, it's almost getting close to the anniversary of the 1 year mark when he officially became the Republican nominee when, well, not officially, but became the de facto nominee when Ted Cruz dropped out of the race. And then at that point, Trump essentially, it was known that he would become the Republican nominee. What was known was that he would actually win the election, and that he'd be selected for the presidency by the people at the top. He was selected to win. Anyways, to anybody who wants to call in, the call-in number is going to be 718-717-8296, 717-8296 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J, here at the one and only Voice of Rebellion Radio. Talk about Chavez, talk about Venezuela, and talk about the current situation and all around the world. Talk about this very historic week. We have, the fact is that a weapon almost as strong as an atomic bomb was used over in Afghanistan. And that's may not even the biggest news of the week, but the first Moab strike in history, which that was on, I think, Thursday. So I think that was the 13th that the Moab was dropped. So that's going to be a big historical date, April 13th, which, like I said, is that the thing had it's total devastation for a mile, 1.7 miles, houses and stuff would be destroyed. And, apparently it gives out like a 10,000-foot mushroom cloud, which is not really too big in comparison to maybe perhaps bigger nuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs that, like, for example, I think the biggest United States nuclear bomb is the, I think it's like the B-80, which this thing has like, it's like a 70-mile total devastation radius, and the fallout would be something incredible, apparently. But and then the Tsar Bomba was the biggest bomb ever detonated, which the Soviet Union detonated, I think, like in 1962. The Tsar Bomba is so big. I think it's like 21 miles of blast radius and, total devastation. And another thing about it is that if the mushroom cloud from it was like 209,000 feet up. Now, the Tsar Bomba may not even exist anymore. I don't think it officially doesn't exist anymore. So, in comparison to those large nuclear weapons, this Moab wasn't that big of a deal. But the Moab, in comparison to what has been used with the atomic weapons that were actually used, they're about to actually comparable. Like I said, is that the atom bomb that was used on Hiroshima, I think, had a mile blast radius, and the bomb that the Moab has just about the same, so a mile blast radius. So and apparently even the ex-president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, didn't seem to be too thrilled about the use of this weapon in this country. And Hamid Karzai, he used to be, he's a puppet that, went along with a lot of the horrors that went on in Afghanistan in the last 15 years with the United States intervention. He's no good guy. Hamid Karzai was a United States lackey for many years, but, maybe this is perhaps Hamid Karzai having a massive turnaround, or it might have just been a moment for publicity, which I think it's more the latter. But, Because again, is that this actually isn't sussing, when it comes to the actions the United States has done in Afghanistan, this is very minute. I mean, 36 combatants were killed. So the people that were killed, I mean, if it is who they said were killed, that's not a problem. The only potential thing to maybe worry about is environmental concerns or whatever from using a bomb of that size. And, even though it's not an atomic bomb, is that these bombs still can have whatever kind of, environmental damage. And also the fact that the United States would, do such a bombastic move and show a force in their country is another concern. This Moab using a weapon that had never been used in combat and actually now using it in combat, which is more of a signal to Syria and North Korea rather than an actual strategic move against ISIS in Afghanistan. If it even was ISIS that they attacked, I really question, anytime that they say they attack terrorists in Afghanistan, I really think that it's more like rival drug gangs and stuff like that they're attacking because the opium productions that are going to Afghanistan. I really don't even think that they attack terrorists too much in Afghanistan. The whole war in Afghanistan seems to be a lot of a sham. And, just remember that also that the terrorists in Afghanistan wouldn't have bloomed if it wasn't for the policy of helping the Mujahideen in the 1980s. Another big shocking thing that happened this week is that ISIS, I was wondering when would be the moment that the mainstream media would maybe try to push the reversal of the public opinion against ISIS. And I didn't think that it maybe wouldn't even happen, in order to go into Syria against Assad, that maybe they would try to make it seem like that, ISIS is maybe not so bad and maybe we should partner up with them against the evil Assad regime. But it actually happened. And there was it wasn't the New York Times directly that wrote this, but they allowed an op-ed article from a journalist that was pretty much claiming that we should side with ISIS in Syria in order to fight the Assad regime. And what he pretty much said is that we should allow ISIS to become Assad's, Iran's, and Russia's nightmare. And at the same time, was also saying that we should help them like we helped the Mujahideen in the 1980s, which would involve arming and training them. So now the things that the United States has done secretly, they allowed the mainstream media now to advocate for the approval of these secret things. Now, I don't think that article was received very well. And I think at this point, I don't know how they could possibly spin things into their favor for that if they wanted to actually do that, rather than maybe just continue their covert support of ISIS. But what we just saw is the potential of it now going open. And what we have said as truthers on the internet, here on these alternative media stations, people called us crazy. People said that these claims were asinine. But what we have seen is this exact thing that we're talking about. And even though that they were saying that as a thing, as like a conditional, as that we should support them. Not that we had or already, but saying that we should support them. But what it is it pretty much is normalizing ISIS as a legitimate group rather than a terrorist death cult over the Middle East. The mainstream media actually did it. And on top of all that, just think about that for a moment. What actually, the major step that is forward in their whole plans in order towards the World War III agenda, because ISIS probably will be a massive factor in potential World War III. Is that if the United States is to invade Syria, the ISIS is still going to be there. The group that the United States has spent a lot of money in arming and training and helping these last few years are going to probably be used as an ally in the ground war against Syria. If they can somehow, justify that on the media openly. Perhaps they could even have American soldiers fighting, with them side by side or something like that. There's a few potential reasons why they might have done that, but it's scary, and it probably shows that we're getting close to the big moment. And it's different, but you could compare is that when the United States, or is that back during the time of World War II, is that the idea of the United States partnering with either Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, I think, seemed pretty crazy amongst the public opinion. But they had to get people to side with one or the other, or to accept that the United States had sided with one or the other. Obviously this is a little bit different, but I feel like this massive public push, is similar to how the mainstream media was able to get the United States people made to accept that we had sided with the Soviet Union. Is similar to maybe what they're trying to do here in Syria. Is a massive public opinion shift. Considering that for many years before World War II, people absolutely feared and abhorred communism. Here, people absolutely hate, for good reason, ISIS and similar groups like it. But maybe they can change the public opinion and make at least paint them as useful idiots or whatever. And now that's what's going on inside the military circles around Washington. But this article, the New York Times, is very scary. And also, it should people say, well, it was just an op-ed article. Chill out. It's just somebody's opinion. But why did you even allow somebody to run something of that nature? What this guy was doing was advocating the sponsoring of terrorism on a mainstream media article that shouldn't have been allowed to run. And I think back in the day, before the media became totally corrupted in this country, way back, that would have not been allowed to run. They would have not ran that article. But this guy also apparently had been supportive of the war in Kosovo. He's also supportive of the Iraq War. Yeah, he was right there supporting, with Tony Blair, George Bush, the people that were behind the Iraq, supporting the Iraq War. This guy, I don't know what the guy's name is. Probably should look it up. And what ultimately might be happening is that the people in America are starting to accept the absolutely crazy nature of this government, and the government's starting to make that more open of what kind of government this government is. But hopefully, the Americans don't embrace the fascist regime that is the United States government. And it seems that more and more that they're starting to leak that out into the open. With the NSA in 2013, that people practically just accepted, what had been the talk of nightmares and what had been long talked about as Orwellian and dystopian. The idea of Big Brother watching everything that we do was now just an accepted reality. And we also Snowden. I bet Snowden was a little shocked himself when he found out that that the American people didn't really care. And maybe that's part of the reason. Maybe that's why the United States government, might have allowed. I think the United States government might have allowed Edward Snowden to leak these, or not, go push harder to stop Edward Snowden, because they wanted to see the social experiment that would be when people found out that every move that they took was being watched. And it didn't really faze Americans so much. It was the Patriot Act, and I think slowly weaning into it, the United States government has been successful in turning the people into conformist sheep that no longer respect, no longer value the ideas of a liberty and a free society. But now they want security, and they want a safety. They want a safety net, and that safety net being the government. And what I mean by that is that they want the government protecting them from all these perceived boogeymen. And they seem to make more and more, on the media. ISIS, Russia, the Hezbollah, all these different groups that they, portray as boogeymen. And, you see the effects of that on the internet. And the effects of, what's the Trump supporters in a way, is that the Trump supporters' mindset is that the whole world hates us practically, so we have to take these extreme steps in order to preserve our country. Which is kind of similar to the German mindset of the 1930s, that why Adolf Hitler was partially able to sway his people to do what they did and, support that asinine ideology was by saying that our country is hated by practically everyone else, and we're trying to preserve this country. And I think that's almost probably the mindset that took place in Nazi Germany, is that our government's fucked up or whatever, but this is what we have to do in order to not get taken over by the communists or not get taken over by Britain or whatever country. The United States is probably similar. Now it's kind of a similar mindset, is that this is what we have to do so we don't get taken over by Sharia law, or so we don't get taken over by the Russians or the Chinese or whoever else. Just to add a new boogeyman every day. There seems to be a new one, but that's really the main three, isn't it? The Chinese, it's the Russians, or it's Muslims, just generally the Muslims. That there seems to be this belief amongst many Americans that we're, under this major threat from Sharia law. It's fictional. It's fiction of, that the Muslims are gonna take us over. Look, is that if there's any country in the Middle East that we need to worry about, that they're influencing our culture too much, it's Israel. There was AIPAC, with the Israeli lobby. They've been able to censor their, the Americans' opinions on Israel. And now you have to be pro-Israel, it seems. And you see how, is that they went from, pro-Israel under Obama wasn't enough. Now they had to go to extremely pro-Israel under Donald Trump. And, I see these people, these Republicans or whatever, that post on different pages, and they seem to think that Obama was, this massive traitor, that absolutely didn't like Israel or whatnot. When he was probably one of the most pro-Israel presidents ever. When you actually look at it, the times that Obama abstained from a vote when it came to the Israel at the United Nations, it was like one time that it happened. The only president, the president had abstained the most when it came to votes about Israel was actually Reagan, which is like the hero of the Republicans. A lot of the Republicans in this country, a lot of the Trump supporters even like Reagan, despite the fact that, how much the establishment that he belonged to. And I see people also making the comparison between, Trump and Reagan, that the fact that they both had to pick an, pro-establishment vice president. Trump picked Pence. Reagan picked Bush Sr., that is. And, when it comes to Bush Sr., the former CIA director, the former, and also a man that was probably involved in the JFK assassination. When it comes to George Bush, when he was, this crime family that he was involved in, and his father, who was definitely involved with, Nazis, he was definitely the perfect establishment, counterweight to maybe someone that's seen as somewhat wild like Ronald Reagan. But I don't think that Ronald Reagan was, any kind of threat to the establishment, and neither Donald Trump. And, is that you look at what happened in the Reagan presidency, and they continued the support for Operation Condor governments, the war on drugs. And, it's actually kind of similar to the Trump presidency, is that this heavy push on the war on drugs, like what's happening right now. It was right now they seem to be pushing heavily on marijuana, even despite that during the campaign, Donald Trump talked about how it should be left up for the states. And now it seems to be a different story inside his administration. The Trump administration in general seems to have flipped everything that they talked about during the campaign is now they're doing the opposite. And even the Chinese thing that he pushed so hard about is that the Chinese had screwed us over for years on trade deals. Now he's talking about that we're working very good at securing some kind of trade deal with China. And when it comes to Chinese actually screwing us on trade deals, yeah, a lot of jobs have been sent over to China, and that's at the work of corporations, and corporations looking for cheaper labor. And it's a system of corporatism that people refuse to acknowledge is what ultimately, has sent so many jobs overseas. I don't think it's necessarily the Chinese government so much, but these corporations have a massive fault in it as well. And I'm sure the Chinese government is partially to blame, of course, and it's our own government, and but also it's a system of corporatism that's done that. It's the corporations deciding the rules that has created this environment, and also the trade deals of the TPP and others that have resulted in so many of our jobs heading to China and overseas. But the TPP, not so much. It hasn't come into effect. But the NAFTA, a lot of our jobs went to Mexico. Is that? That's why, but you start talking about economic nationalism, and then people start looking at you crazy. But, economic nationalism, the nationalization of massive of the bigger corporations, and of things are important when it comes to electric, your oil, that kind of stuff. Economic nationalism is a very smart idea, and it's done. I don't know. When it comes to it would be a bigger experiment if it happened in a country here in the United States compared to what's happened before. Venezuela, it's happened, in some smaller countries, and there's been some good results. And people will point out what's going on right now, but that's acting like sanctions don't exist. That's acting like this economic blockade that's been pretty much going on in Venezuela, almost to the point the Cuban blockade is not happening. And then, people also point at Cuba or whatever, they see the failure there, and then there's literally a blockade against them. They don't really even count. They barely can trade with anybody. And part of the problem was also getting too dependent on the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, they had big problems in the 90s. There was also big problems over in North Korea in the 90s. And I think there was other factors involved as well. The famine killed quite a bit of people, actually, that happened in the 90s. And then also brought about the Songbun, which is a more militarized society. I guess it was to counter what had happened during the famine or whatever, in order to try to, fix it, or try to reorganize everything, and try to get back to normal lives. And that's going back right now. And that's another thing, is that when talk about North Korea, is that just because the leader is not perfect or whatever doesn't mean that they should be bombed and that their government should be taken out. And when it comes to North Korea, there's some faults for sure. Personality cult, the more authoritarian nature of the regime. But you have to realize that some of that came out of necessity. Is that the authoritarian nature of the regime, they are literally countered by enemies to their south with South Korea. Japan's nearby. The United States is at their border, at the DMZ, and has been there since the war. They've had, back in the 90s, Russia was hostile to them. Now not anymore with Vladimir Putin, their allies. China is a shaky alliance, which also is not a country that you want to be uncertain about where they stand with you, considering that China has a massive military and that they are right there. Beijing, their capital, is actually not too far from Pyongyang, their capital. They're so close together that if China was ever to decide, to take an action, deal with them themselves, that North Korea would be in some serious trouble. So the North Korean government takes a very hard-line stance, I think, to counter this pressure that they feel all around them. And now looking up, it's still talk. There was a big military parade actually, I think, today in North Korea. Which is, I think, a continuation of the Founders' Day. which they showed off apparently some nuclear submarines that they have, which is a scary thought because there's the idea that they might have that they might be able to sneak up by the United States or whatever, launch missiles. Even though I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think North Korea is nutty enough to launch nuclear weapons at the United States, and I don't think they have intentions to. It's a deterrent. Realize that if they didn't have that, they would be like Iraq already. And you see what happened to Iraq, and then they got the shit bombed out of them. And you look at Afghanistan; it's turned into a Moab testing ground. The countries that the United States, if you just allow the United States to bomb your country, they will, and they will never face any problems about it. Is that the United States government continues to do this almost 16 years later, and they're still bombing the crap out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, they got to Afghanistan first back in 2001. They got to Iraq in 2003, which was actually about the time that the Moab was built. And that was originally was plans made to use it against Iraq. They also used depleted uranium against Iraq back in 1991. So they've used new weapons against these countries, Iraq and Afghanistan, which have been made, you could say, training ground for the bigger war against Iran, Syria. But here's the thing about depleted uranium, is that depleted uranium gets everywhere and it makes people sick. That's why a lot of these people have Gulf War syndrome that came home from the war in 1991. Depleted uranium, so that's why some people categorize the war in 1991 as nuclear war. And it's, if you get just one speck of that stuff in your lungs, it's like an X-ray going off in your body for the rest of your life. So it makes the chances of you of having cancer go up by probably about 1,000 times. I don't know what's the actual number, but you can imagine it's a lot higher than before if you get that. And a lot of these soldiers went home sick, and a lot of these people are dying. And it's kind of covered up about what this Gulf War syndrome is, but it's probably caused by that, and also the fact that the weapons that probably Saddam received from the United States, that he might have received these weapons from the United States, this big chemical weapon stockpile. I think they bombed, and they had alarms going off, like Americans, the chemical weapons alarms were going off, and they apparently they just ignored it. The United States government ignored these chemical weapons alarms that kept going off, and a lot of these soldiers got sick afterwards. Some of these people, I don't think they lasted very long at all after the 91 war. None of these people are, around 45 years old. And, they're starting to get to that point, like when the Vietnam vets, a lot of these people from the weaponry they used against Vietnam, they got sick from, when they got to their 40s and 50s, a lot of these people started dying off. That's why you don't even see too many Vietnam vets still alive. They used the Agent Orange against Vietnam, which, who produces Agent Orange? Monsanto. So the people that produce Agent Orange, this disastrous chemical that led to burst effects, led to so many horrors inside of Vietnam, is the same people that want to mess around with your food right now, and creating this Frankenfoods that have been shown to make people sick, and are banned in many countries and are forced to be labeled in other countries. I actually got into a little debate, I guess you could say, a work or whatever about about GMOs or whatever. And I just said it about, it's like this stuff is banned in Russia, and but they don't even label it here in the United States. And it's almost unavoidable. You go to the grocery store, that's where you're gonna buy. You're gonna buy GMO food, GMO garbage. That's what it is. I'm guilty of it. I still eat it because it's everywhere. It's hard to avoid. But I totally suggest that if you can, don't eat it. It's terrible. And I've seen, apparently in rats, which is like one of the closest things to a human that you can test something on, it's been shown to create these big giant tumors on them. So you're going to tell me that that's not something to look out for? And, and then there's all these edgy people on the internet or whatnot that says, oh, well, if you don't like GMOs, you just don't like science. You must be one of those people that's afraid of science. And, you must be also one of the people that hates vaccines and also believe the chemtrails or something like that, which those other two things are for a different day. But also there seems to be, when there seems to be a, when it comes to vaccines or whatever, also that's we're getting way off topic now, but I definitely have my questions, to say at least, about vaccines. I'm not going to take a hard, when it comes to radio, I haven't done my research really to say one way or another. It's a very important thing. I know that there might be even listeners that take my advice off the radio in order to, into their own lives and whatnot. So I don't want to, push a massive, definitely don't, when it comes to vaccines, don't take my, what I have to say as any kind of recommendation, because I don't really know too much about vaccines, but all I know is that there seems to be potential that it might cause autism or whatever because the mercury levels that they put in those things, and and also I tell you one thing is that before you get a vaccine, before you get vaccines, especially certain types, like if you're a young lady or you have a daughter or whatever that's about to get the HPV vaccine or whatever, may do a little bit of research into it because apparently there's some very massive side effects that can happen from that. And what I mean by massive side effects, like deadly side effects. So I wouldn't, I would do my research on that, like anything really medical, because, you have to realize the doctors are going to be for profit a lot of times, is that they're pushing pharmaceutical company products oftentimes. So whenever they're going to prescribe you a pill or, give you a vaccine or, especially certain types of vaccines, or surgeries or whatnot, do a little research. You got the internet, and try to look, of course, at accredited websites, and balance out what all the stuff between your doctor and the internet and all that in order to before making a decision. Nowadays, especially because it seems that the doctors, the medical fields became pretty corrupt. It's the saying is that, look at American society nowadays and the corruption that's spread between the politicians to the media to the medical field. You can't trust anyone, it seems. And then your education, that these, I'm a product of the public school system. I think I'm lucky because, what they were pushing the public school system was bullshit. They whitewashed all the stuff that they did in Operation Condor in our textbooks. I don't remember reading any of that stuff in our textbooks. And, they're teaching less and less and only stuff that pushes their narrative. And also, they didn't really push, they really, I took the advanced U.S. history. And even in the advanced U.S. history, there's massive, pretty big things that were left out. But we did talk about like difference between like Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton or whatever, and I think I made it kind of clear like with the writing or whatever that I was kind of a fan of Aaron Burr. It's like, you know what? Do you fucking treasonous pig? I'll fucking shoot you. That's what's gonna happen. They dueled the guy. I mean, that's pretty badass. Is that this guy had the nuts to, as the vice president, he was going to duel the treasurer that he was going to try to corrupt the country and try to install a bank in this country. He was trying to put the first central bank, and he shot Hamilton over it. And, even though he had to go into like exile and everything afterwards, that's pretty badass what Aaron Burr did. And then now Andrew Jackson, even though I disagree on what he did on other stuff, Andrew Jackson stopped the second attempt at a Federal Reserve in this country. And his last words were, "I killed the banks." He might have done some very questionable, maybe even horrendous acts when it came to the Native Americans, which, when it comes to Andrew Jackson, it's kind of funny because there's just the whole family rumors that I'm actually related to the guy. My family on that side comes from that area of Tennessee or whatever that Andrew Jackson was from. And, we even have some resemblances in the family. It looks like that we could be related to Andrew Jackson. Even though Andrew Jackson had no legitimate children, but there might have been illegitimate children that he had. He was known that he was fooling around with the slaves. And, he might have had a kid somewhere along. And, what was it? I believe that actually one of his, it was kind of weird is that one of his sons or something, or one of his grandsons, lived in the Jackson house when he was the president, or when he was still alive. I think when he was the president, and he lived all the way to like 1900 something or whatever. It's pretty interesting, the story of Andrew Jackson. But again, like I said, his slaves Obviously, I don't support that. It was a different time, of course, and it's also relative. I mean, the whole concept of slavery was one of the most horrendous, immoral things this country ever did. But, of course, is that I don't know what type of slave owner that Andrew Jackson was. I mean, he might not have been the most brutal, slave owner or whatever. When it came in comparison to some of these other ones, some of these other people that were slave owners at the times, should they all be lumped together? Honestly, how I see it is it was a different time. All these people were very wrong for doing that or whatnot. But we have to look at relatively what these people did when, taking out their accomplishments and his accomplishments against the banks. So just to clarify, I'm not a fan of Andrew Jackson as a whole, as a person, but what he did against the banks, that's what I like. And then, the big one, or what was I get into, or one of the big things that, that they push, of course, in the U.S. history or whatever, the public education system, was that they pushed the idea that the South was 100% responsible for the Civil War, and that Lincoln was the one that freed the slaves. When if you actually look into it, I think Lincoln was a racist himself, and the North was complicit. I mean, they did at least talk about that, the Fugitive Slave Act that the North had, is that you could turn in slaves for money up in the North, and they were returned to the South. The North was also complicit in slavery, and they were no different, really. There was differences that they didn't allow slaves in their states, but they're still complicit in the system of slavery. It's but of course, they push the narrative that the South was responsible for the war, and when I look at it, is it seems like the Civil War might have been an attempt of the elites to divide this country by pitting the North against the South, and making this country practically go bankrupt and have that very painful period of Reconstruction. And then afterwards, when we finally actually started doing good again, then we had the Federal Reserve was instituted. The South had a very painful period during the Reconstruction. There was martial law in the South till 1877, and to me, I think the Civil War was about taxation. I don't think the Civil War was really about slavery so much. The whole talk about that slavery was even was even the reason for the war wasn't even until 2 years into the war that Lincoln started pushing that. The Confederacy allowing slaves on their territory was horribly immoral, and there's no way defense of the Confederacy as a whole. Because nowadays, you have to really, I know it's that we're a really touchy period, in that, people, you say one thing, whatever, different, and then people say that you belong to them, that you must be one of those pro-Confederate people or whatnot. But of course, when it comes to a few of the things about, that whole subject, I have kind of a bit different views than, maybe some of the people on the more mainstream left have, when it comes to stuff like the Confederate flag in general. It's like people having the Confederate flag. I don't really, I know that most of the people that probably have the Confederate flag, or not most, I don't know if it'd be most, but a lot of the people that have the Confederate flag flying are not racist. They're not prejudiced. They see that as a banner of Southern heritage. If we're going to talk about what banner, a lot of people were killed under, the United States flag. Is the United States flag now going to be considered racist because of what happened to the Native Americans over the early 1700s into the 1800s? Are we going to tell the British that their flag is, racist because of how many hundreds of millions were probably killed across overseas during the period of imperialism from the 1500s all the way up to the 1800s? It starts really, if you start going down that rabbit hole, it starts to really get bizarre. Anyways, we're at 10:29. If you want to call in, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio, talking about Venezuela and a lot of other shit tonight. As I go off my tangents. That's just it's a thing that we do here at Voice of Rebellion Radio. Is that I talk 30 minutes about the actual topic or whatever, and then I go off on tangents about a lot of other things. And I guess when I have a co-host and I stay like anchored to one subject, but when I don't have my co-host, I just kind of go around different subjects or whatnot, and that's kind of what I do. What I'm doing tonight, especially this week, has just been so historic. The Moab being used, how close we are to war with war in Syria. The talk right now, the news with North Korea. The fact that it looks pretty close right there at the peninsula. When it comes to Venezuela and the coup attempt against them, is that they also tried the recall referendum. They've tried for many years to try to take down the Bolivian government. And, Venezuela, the question is, could they ever try a United States intervention against Venezuela? And, right now with North Korea, Syria, one positive, I guess we can pull out of it, out of all these negatives, is that maybe they won't touch Venezuela in the next few years because they'll be with their hands tied around, Syria and North Korea. But of course, it's not really a positive when you look at it at the whole view, because it's just like it's these countries instead of these countries. That I don't know if I don't think that Trump would try to take on Syria and North Korea at the same time, because that means he's also going to have to take on Iran onto that bunch. But I could definitely see, the tensions remain extremely high on the Korean Peninsula, and maybe even a surgical strike taking place. Even though that I think that if a surgical strike takes place, it's going to be going to war. Kim Jong-un, now I don't think that he would use nuclear weapons if the conventional weapons were used against his country in one time. I think that the nuclear weapons are a deterrent, but I don't think that he would be able to use it. I really hope he doesn't use it. They're saying that his nuclear weapons probably don't even work in the first place because he tried to test or whatever and didn't even really work. So that might have been United States sabotage. And I wonder what kind of weapons that the United States has in secret made to sabotage nukes that are in the air or whatnot. And his nuclear tests have been getting more frequent, and it seems that he's really starting to put his foot on the ground and saying that the United States will not touch this country. He's been there 5 years, Kim Jong-un, and he got there when he was in his 20s. And he's, I don't know if he still is the world's youngest head of state. There's a whole set of challenges with that. But it's definitely getting interesting. In Venezuela, the protests have they're starting to get out of hand. The last few weeks, last few months, we've seen a resurgence of the protest that it seemed like that they had kind of quieted down over a few months. And then, it almost came to a head last year with the potential removal of the Bolivian government via a recall referendum that never happened. They didn't get the recall referendum in motion quick enough. It almost did, but the recall referendum fell apart, and Maduro would not face a recall referendum in 2016. If he was face a recall referendum this year, it would only bring about his vice president to power, which the opposition probably doesn't want that because Tariq al-Sami is a fervent Chavista, and he's very strong in favor, I think, of Palestine, which, I think that the Venezuelan opposition, they're connected to Israel. That's what Chavez, at least, accused the Venezuelan opposition of being connected to Israel. And it's kind of weird, that they talk about lies like chemical weapons or whatnot, just like how the Israeli lobby pushes the war in Syria with lies like the chemical weapons lie here in the United States. And, when it comes to the it's kind of weird how they are, how there's the same narratives are used in different political situations all around the world, with the media, with the think tanks, and that's what it just comes down to. The same think tanks are hatching up these sometimes ludicrous accusations against Venezuela and other Russian allies, and that's what it ultimately comes down to. Is you look at these countries, it's a Russian ally versus one that belongs to the New World Order. United States being the military arm of the New World Order, and then there's Russia, which is the biggest country that opposes the New World Order. Uh, Russia is the biggest thorn in the side to the New World Order and their agenda. And people will say that Russia's part of the plan or whatever. People will say that Putin, has $200 billion, and that means that he's one of the elite, but wasn't it Jacob Rothschild that even said that he's a traitor to the New World Order? I don't know how true that quote is. Okay, but disregard that. Look what he's been doing in Syria. What he's been doing in multiple countries is that he definitely seems to be hindering their agenda. You think that they would want to have taken on Syria quicker. If he was part of the agenda, wouldn't he have just allowed the United States to strike Syria back in 2013? And, World War III is apparently one of the big things that the New World Order has to do in order to bring about the New World Order. Wouldn't have Russia just allowed the United States to start the World War III back in 2013? And another thing is that if, there seems to be, if Vladimir Putin and the United States were actually, working together or whatnot, and they're both complicit, they're making these big I guess you could say it'd be part of some show, but it seems like it's a lot of effort that they make that there's these two rival banking associations. Well, they have the IMF and World Bank that have been established, the United States and the West. Russia's been working on the BRICS, and while that's kind of came to a halt, the whole BRICS project, wouldn't Vladimir Putin have? I think that Vladimir Putin, I don't think that he would have taken that far of a stance. People are easily duped in the modern age, and I don't know if they would really have to do all that. Well, anyways, I'm pretty convinced that what we're seeing these last few months, it is the buildup. I try not to be, be a person that pushes hysteria, and tries to, I want people to remain calm throughout this, but I'm hoping that people, make a big push to inform their friends about what's going on right now, because this seems to be the big push right before the big war. And, the handwriting's all over the walls. They struck Syria, for crying out loud. Come on, this is no joke at this point anymore. And people say that this is just a proportionate strike. Are we going to really believe that? Are we going to really believe the same people that talk about this chemical weapons attack lie, and the same people that pushed the lie of WMDs in 2003 in Iraq? And people that actually believe that the Trump administration is different, well, you're already kind of lost politically, because the Trump administration is acting like any other neocon group. They're pushing the same lies that these neocon think tanks want them to push, and they're continuing the same globalist policies that were under the Obama administration. And, Trump used the Bush-created weapon over there in Afghanistan, the Moab, and you can imagine that's a sign to Syria. And it probably will be used again in Syria, that if, they might not use nuclear weapons in a war with Syria and Iran, but they might use Moabs. And, even though that it's like the same thing without doing the same thing. That it's a small, it's like a small nuclear weapon that creates a lot of damage, very psychologically damaging to a country. But at the same time, it's not like probably something that would justify. I think it wouldn't automatically trigger a nuclear volley if they were to use it. Man, that's the mindset. But also the wondering why this thing's so powerful. It's a thing that's 21,000 pounds, a 21,000 pound bomb that they dropped on Afghanistan. So that happened this week, and as well, what happened this week? I think Tillerson also, he went to Russia or whatever, and apparently I think it was pretty cold. Is reading over there. over there in Moscow. Tillerson's, the whole Tillerson. Tillerson also met with, I think, Lavrov earlier in the Trump administration. It's been kind of awkward, and it's now getting more awkward. That the tensions heat up between the United States and Russia. But it's weird how quickly that one of the biggest things that was pushed about the Trump administration was that he'd be more pro-Russia, as it went away, and now that he's no longer the pro-Russian. People were trying to say that this guy is a Kremlin agent or whatever. Even people were saying Trumpsky, and people were saying that he might have been some kind of KGB mole or whatever, or FSB mole. Now it's the FSB. People, with the protest or whatever, were like putting pictures was repeal Trump and a hammer and sickle next to it, alluding to Trump as a communist. Now that he's in the presidency, it's a different story. And President Trump seems to be much different than the person that campaigned last year. And then the guy that campaigned last year seemed to be kind of different than the guy that we knew for many years on TV or whatnot. But the guy that campaigned last year is the President Trump is different than the guy that campaigned last year. It's a different. It's also in some ways you could say it's a different world what we are living in. Than the tensions have went up. Everything seems so tense right now, and even it's bled over the Facebook. The knowledge that we are now very close to World War III. People are putting memes or whatever about how close we are to World War III. It's the weird thing is that the build up to World War III won't be marked by maybe propaganda posters or whatnot. There'll be memes on Facebook, and making fun of Kim Jong-un and stuff like that. And Kim Jong-un, people easily make fun of him or whatever. But imagine running a country when you're only 20-something years old. Hell, I mean, you see a lot of Americans, they're not even running their own lives at 20-something years old. They're still living the frat boy life, partying and don't really got a solid job or whatnot. This guy's running a country. Obviously, I'm being a little sarcastic, but it's like, get your shit together. You're going to be making fun of that guy. That guy's got his shit together. He's like, you barely can run a cash register over a fast food place. That guy's running a country. Again, I'm joking because I know that most Americans are good people, and I'm not saying that that's Americans. Really just young people. I think all around the world. There's definitely gonna be those few around the world. Like I said, this quote frat boy without a fraternity or whatever. There's always those people around the world, but again, you have to Kim Jong-un. The way that he's running his country might seem erratic, but he is only 30-something years old. He took over the country. He might seem erratic, but he took over the country when he was only 20-something years old. And Kim Jong-il was older. Kim Il-sung was like 30-something at least, but Kim Jong-un's running the country very young, and use of force is one of the few ways that he can hold on to his power with so much threats around him. The Chinese, the United States, and people say that China's their ally. It's a shaky ally, and now that China's saying that they might deal with North Korea themselves, what does that mean? I mean, the Chinese move troops over there. They say, though, I think the Chinese said in case that the United States strikes. But how we know that the Chinese are not bringing troops in order to attack themselves? And the Chinese are snake-like. I have to say that about the Chinese, is that they have a history of attacking their former allies. And even though that China might be their friend at the moment, is that they can easily turn into their enemy. And they seem to do what's best for them at the moment. It seems to be, I guess, maybe the Chinese motto of the Chinese government. And that's why we're kind of questioning, Russia's close relationship with China, because, China has a history of doing that. But I think that Russia is going to be cautious when it comes to relationship with China. Right now, China supports Iran, Syria, seems to be just on that same sphere. But I wonder how quickly could China flip over to the United States. And, it's kind of weird that Donald Trump's meeting with China. Maybe that's part of the thing that's being discussed right now is whether China could maybe establish some kind of military partnerships and more ties with the United States, for when the big war comes eventually, China will be on America's side. And I don't that could be. I mean, it doesn't seem like it at the moment, but I'm just speculating. Trying to make sense out of this shit that's been brought on about, what's been all this shit that's been laid out in front of us. So that's going on. It's been a very bizarre, months in general. And all the news, all different news that's coming about. And you have to really cycle through what's actually, because a lot of it's propaganda, a lot of it's just mainstream media spin and think tank propaganda, stuff from people like the Council of Foreign Relations and people from like Project from a New American Century, the Kagan family, pushing into the media. And then of course media is ran by corrupt people. Fox News is owned by Rupert Murdoch, and the Saudi prince has the second biggest stake in Fox News. CNN was founded by billionaire elite Ted Turner, and then you have MSNBC that's has a military special interest behind it. One thing that is a good sign is that North Korea doesn't seem to want to test the United States too much by the fact that they didn't test a nuclear weapon yesterday on April 15th, and now we're into April 16th. It's actually April 17th over there. That military parade I was watching was early on April 17th. It's right now about, I think, 11:16 over there in North Korea, and there was no nuclear test that was done. I think that North Korea is not really willing to test the United States, and they're not going to get any more. Not try anything more. By the way, Mike Pence came to Seoul today, and he's on the first leg of an Asian tour. Of course, South Korea and Japan have a very strong alliance, and maybe that's what Mike Pence is also trying to reassure the alliance between the United States and Japan, because Japan and the United States alliance is kind of falling apart, especially I think towards the end of the Obama administration, and But it was one of the weird things that after Trump's victory, the first people that wanted to see Trump, it seemed like, was Japan. Japan was kind of establishing a relationship with Russia last year and last 2 years. It seems like they might have been more leaning towards Russia, and the possibility that Japan could look towards Russia. But the thing is that Russia is defending North Korea. So would Russia ever be able to maintain simultaneously a North Korean alliance and a Japanese alliance? Probably not. It'd be highly unlikely. But it's anything's possible. And another big variable that comes into this whole equation when it comes into trying to figure out the Far East is what's going to happen in the election in December. Is that they're going to have an election, and South Korea could maybe perhaps elect someone that's more lenient towards North Korea. That will pave the way for Russia maybe to establish a relationship or more of a relationship with South Korea, and then maybe they could work towards something big, maybe even the potential of a easement of relations between North Korea and South Korea, more talks, maybe an eventual reunification. It would be kind of a pipe dream, but it's possible, the potential reunification with the right conditions over there in Korea. And, is that if then maybe after that, just a total easement relationship in the Far East in general, with Japan, South Korea, North Korea getting along somewhat decently, with Russia as the mutual ally that puts them all, puts the whole puzzle together. And, maybe that also perhaps Russia could use, if China starts acting erratic and may even starts acting towards more pro-United States, maybe Russia could use the fact that, hey, look, you got China over there, they're pretty scary, and you already have the United States to deal with, or the United, if you either have the United States, either have the United States and China to deal with, or you could have us and all of us working together. I don't know, just a few different possibilities. There's definitely a lot of variables trying to figure out the puzzle that is the Far East, and trying to figure out the South America, going back there, is that another thing that's going to heavily decide Venezuela's future and South America's future is an election in Colombia this year or next year, with the potential of a more pro-Chavista, left-leaning president Jorge Robledo would be a big upset, I would say. Him defeating the establishment. The current vice president is looking to run German Vargas, who, if Vargas wins, is going to be continuing the establishment there. But if Robledo wins, that would definitely ease the tensions on the Northwest South America. At the same time, another big thing that we're looking at is whether Lula wins Brazil, which would be the biggest country in South America, going back towards the era pink tide and away from the shift to the right that South America has witnessed in the last 2 years. That if Brazil becomes left wing again, then Brazil and Colombia and then Paraguay's election, it could be a massive shift back to the left. And Argentina right now, they're experiencing major protests. So also that could, all that together could potentially set the path towards a weakened relationships or a weakened government in Argentina and the collapse of the Argentinian government. Again, this whole scenario is probably highly unlikely too, but that would probably actually be the best case scenario. What I was talking about over there, is that, it's somehow Russia becomes a mutual ally in the Far East, and that the pink tide makes resurgence in South America. Another bad news that came about out of the Middle East this week was that Erdogan looks like he's going to be in power indefinitely. It was that the referendum that expanded presidential powers passed, and Erdogan already was the presidential powers that he has. It looks like he's going to get even more. Man's been accused of being a fascist, supporting ISIS, and many other things. Is that he's known to be a shithead, and he's anti-Assad. He's been an opponent of the Assad regime for the most of the civil war, and Turkey's been another player in the destruction of Syria. And I think it was who was it? It was the Iranian president, or I think it was Assad, that said that Syria became a graveyard for Assad's dreams, and for Erdogan's dreams. Erdogan has been he's been really hoping to see the Syrian government collapse. He's really been hoping to see Syria fail. And now that he's now that he's going to be, his powers are going to be expanded, it looks like he's going to stay around for a while. So I wonder, though, the whole Turkey-Russia experiment, I think, already has kind of failed. And there's one place that Russia is not going to be able to push, towards them. Hopefully, Russia doesn't give up on some of their other, Russia, they're kind of trying to reach out to some countries that have been historically pro-American allies, is what I've noticed. And, like with Japan, how they reached out to them in the last 2 years. And, Egypt, their little attempts to try to establish a relationship with Sisi, but now it looks like that Trump's going to, Trump also seems to be making it looks like he's going to side with Sisi in any way. I don't think Russia really wants to deal with Sisi, considering that Sisi's been a de facto pro-Israel, and what he's done to strangle the Palestinian lands. He's not even allowing Palestinians to leave, and he's flooded the tunnels or whatever. Apparently, that's what's happened under his presidency. So, but there's been other examples of. I think there's been those examples of the Russian government reaching out, and the Russian government's also reaffirming is really showing they're sticking to their allies. Like, they're not ditching Syria. There was talk even last year that they might ditch Syria and that they were going to abandon the alliance with Assad. They're sticking hard to the stance of Iran and Venezuela. I'm pretty sure they continue their strong alliance with Venezuela. At one, and even though it doesn't seem to be there, just realized that they actually named the street after Hugo Chavez in Moscow back in 2013. There's a pretty strong relationship with Russia and Venezuela. So, and there's also solidarity between Iran and Venezuela. So there's a lot of players that'll help keep another 2002 like event from happening in Venezuela. It's a different world than the 1973 coup that happened against Chile. People have seen what the United States government's done, and they're weary of it. They're weary of NGOs. They're weary of, subversive groups that the United States brings into countries. And the United States has multiple different ways of doing regime change. And regime changes it should be seen as a dirty word. It should be seen as this is one of the dirtiest things that the United States government has done, is killed millions with the policy regime change since World War II started. And, in fact, if you looked at how many people that the United States government's probably killed since World War II, it's about 20 to 30 million people. That's Hitler level numbers. That's actually around the Stalin level numbers. But Stalin killed his own people, Hitler with his own people, and people overseas. Actually, numbers are probably higher when it comes to how many people Hitler killed overseas, compared to just the ones that he killed on his own territory. But again, though always when I mention about the Hitler numbers, people always say, well, it's Stalin, what about Mao? Yeah, those two. Mao was a lot more, actually, than the 11 million. Mao was about 45 million plus that were killed. And we'll all remember the common denominator, gun control. And, in Venezuela, people say there's gun control in Venezuela. There's militias that are in Venezuela. People still have guns in Venezuela. And I think, because the InfoWars said that there's gun control in Venezuela doesn't make it true. Of course, that there's guns that have ended up in the wrong hands that have been seized, and it's probably guns being imported by the United States, and the Cocaine Importation Agency that we know as the CIA probably gave guns to some pretty sketchy people, the right-wing terrorists in the country, and the opposition. Capriles is, right now, we've probably seen the prelude to another run by him. But this is going to be marked by violence. Is marked by what we should see is that Capriles is backed by violence. He's backed by subversive acts, and ultimately, what he wants to see is a coup, so he could become the president without there ever being a election. But I think that the Venezuelan people are vigilant, and the collectivos will never allow another coup to happen. Not one like 2002. There might be ones that are earlier in the planning that they might be able to thwart at an earlier stage. I don't think that Venezuela is going to fall in the next couple of years, and I expect the PSUV to win next year. Now, I won't call it an official prediction, because my official prediction in sports seemed to come out kind of wrong. Watching the NBA and whatnot today, and some unexpected results happening. And in baseball and other stuff, but just look at my baseball playoff predictions a little bit better. But when it comes to politics, I seem to be pretty good. But I just ain't gonna say just in case, because I don't know. Sometimes I think I let what I want to see happen rather than what's probably going to happen judge it. But this case is not one of those. I think that the people are vigilant in defending democracy in Venezuela. Thanks everyone for tuning in to Voice of Rebellion Radio today on April 16th. If you haven't subscribed to me on Facebook, Chris Jackson Rojas. And next week we'll be back, same time, 9 o'clock Eastern. And by the way, we'll have this recording up on YouTube. If you missed part of it earlier, you can tune in on YouTube later. The upload will be in about 35 minutes. And
point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple, Al-Aqsa. The name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread among amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down